Welcome to Cosmic Comics, Games and Collectibles, your den of geekism. We carry comics old and new, magazines, toys, games like Pokemon, Magic, D&D. Want Godzilla, Ultraman, Star Trek, Ninja Turtles, Funko Pops? You'll find it all here. Shop our Cosmic Sound Room and pick up a record or two. Enjoy our Comic Coffee Lounge with a cup of Sasquatch coffee while geeking out over a super cool movie on our big screen. Cosmic Comic, Games and Collectibles. Superman loves us, and so will you.
Hi everyone, Jason Hunt here, inviting you to join us every Saturday morning for news, the week's headlines in science fiction, fantasy, horror, comic books, video games, plus Comic-Con updates and the weather, and the occasional interview along the way. We call it Good Morning Multiverse. We hope you join us every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, right here on Sci-Fi for Me TV.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Critical Blast podcast. I'm Damascus Minsmeyer, your guest host. Our regular host, RJ Carter, won't be in tonight. He got a new pet Mogwai last night and accidentally fed it after midnight, so he's dealing with consequences of that. But don't worry, he'll be back tomorrow. In the meantime, we'll be talking with author Mark Grunnells. He's got a new book called The Advantaged Out, and I'd like to say hi, Mark, and welcome. Thank you for being on the show. And
hello. Thank you for having me on.
No problem. I always love to start these shows by asking the question, who are you, what do you do, and why do you do it?
Well, I'm a weirdo.
Welcome to the club.
Choice in that matter. But sometimes I think I'm a guy who just didn't grow up. So I'm constantly still playing make-believe. I just now write it down and sell it to people. And
that's a good way to put it.
I do it because I have a passion for it, and I do it because it makes me happy.
Yeah, it sounds good. So let's talk about your new book, The Advantaged. Tell us about the settings and the characters, and yeah, there you go. I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed the book. I read it and I reviewed it for Critical Blast. It was probably my favorite book of this year thus far. I just love the writing style and the speed with which sometimes I usually read when I'm like eating lunch or dinner or whatnot. And I kept going back to this one like constantly until it was done. I think I zipped through it in about 4 or 5 days, something like that. So tell us a little bit about it.
Bless you, and thank you so much. Your review actually meant quite a lot to me. It's the Advantaged is a coming of age story, for lack of a better word.
Hmm.
Sometimes I call it a moral dilemma story, although I don't think that's really a subgenre. I just made it up.
Hmm.
But it's set on a college campus. It's about a young person who gets caught up in what seems at first like a little white lie
Hmm.
that snowballs, and he gets in this situation where he feels like he's trapped himself with the lie. Um,
Hmm.
and I wanted to. It may sound weird, but I wanted to write a book that didn't have the traditional antagonist paradigm. I wanted
Hmm.
to try a book where my hope was the reader would like all of the characters. And even when
Sure.
they did things that were questionable, while you might not condone the actions, you would at least understand enough about that character to know why they did it. Um,
Hmm.
that could create the tension, and that if you like all the characters, you get them in this situation where someone's bound to get hurt, and you don't want to see any of them hurt. Um,
Right.
but I had a lot of fun with it. I liked this idea of a kid who's pretending to be a student at this college that he's not really a student
Hmm.
at, mostly because he has been outcast and friendless for most of his life. And when he meets these people who seem to like him, he's
Hmm.
afraid. At the beginning, he didn't think he was going to see these people again. They just assumed he was a student at the college. He let them think that. Once he realized that he was actually forming bonds with these people, because of his background, because of all the rejection and heartache he had experienced, fear led him to just compound the lie. And
Hmm.
I thought it was a really interesting idea to explore. And mostly once I started writing it, I sort of fell in love with the characters, and then
Hmm.
it was just every day I couldn't wait to get up and find out, what was going to happen with them next.
Mm. Yeah, the main character, Silas Granger, is actually his name. You did a very good job of, as you said, making him especially likable and also three-dimensional and realistic. Because, like you say, they are perhaps doing everything that's morally right, maybe at all times, but you understand why, and they seem so realistic because everyone has been at that point in their life where they want to be accepted, and he's just telling a little white lie, but then he goes to such lengths to keep it going. He researches the campus. He makes like a fake schedule. I thought that was real interesting. He's making a fake schedule. He's like befriending teachers and everything like that on the Furman campus when he's actually a student at the Greenville Tech. But
Yeah.
that was all very, very realistically done. So I commend you on making a very in-depth three-dimensional characters.
Well, thank you. I know Silas was the trickiest one to write because he was the one most actively um, doing morally questionable things.
Hmm.
But again, I felt like the key was giving him a background where you would understand that. And while nothing in this book is autobiographical,
Hmm.
I can relate to the character of Silas a lot because,
Hmm.
I had, a rough teenage period of my life.
Hmm.
Um, and that really gets to you in a way that kind of stays with you.
It
Um,
does. I had a rough
I'm,
teenage years too, so I get that for sure. And it
I
does.
mean,
It
I'm
does stay with you.
I'm almost in my 50s now, but there's still some of that comes up sometimes. And
Hmm.
people who maybe didn't have quite as rough a time in their teen years, even though
Hmm.
I think to some degree everybody has a rough time in their teens, but
Hmm.
some more than others. And if you didn't really go
Sure.
through some of those things, it might be harder to understand how that can mess with your mind and make you question, your
Hmm.
decisions, make you question how much you should reveal to people. But I wanted to make Silas fully realized enough that, even if that wasn't the reader's background, they could understand it. And that's why your review meant so much to me because
Hmm.
I felt like I had accomplished what I wanted, but you never
Hmm.
really know how other people are going to respond to it until it's out there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, yeah, I had a rough teenage years myself, so I identified with his reluctance to like trust. He had some, I guess you could say, some trust issues. Silas has some trust issues. I really liked the relationship with his father in the story too, because I liked it that it was very positive. I get tired of like the angsty sort of, you know, teenager who try to rebel against their parents and all that. And it gets kind of old and stale. But I really liked it that they had a very positive, trusting relationship. I liked that the Silas could be so open with his father about himself and his sexuality and his just his life in general. That was very, very well done.
Well, while it is true there are a lot of people, especially young queer people, who have, some issues with their parents and acceptance,
Hmm.
I did want to kind of show that, there is a flip side to that.
Hmm.
And, particularly in this day and age, much more than when I was coming up in the 80s,
Hmm.
see people coming out and, you know, being their true authentic selves at a much younger age than I could have ever conceived of in my
Hmm.
youth. So I wanted to reflect that. I wanted to show a parent child dynamic that was positive and accepting and encouraging. And that also, because they were close and they were accepting of each other, that also made certain parts of the book where Silas even had to deceive his father.
Hmm.
It heightened it because this isn't like a distant father son relationship, but they were close. They
Hmm.
were really in each other's lives. So I felt like it punched that even harder.
That's true. I liked the humor in the book also was funny because you're talking about Silence's father. I liked his humor. I think one of my favorite lines in the book was Silas had gone with his new Furman friends to Waiting for Godot, and after he was telling his dad about it, and he was like, "Ah, this is it's a play about nothing." And he's like, "Oh, was Kramer in it?" And it's just like that's one of those things. If you get it, you get it. If you're too young for it, you don't. But I got it,
Well,
so I thought it was hilarious.
I'm glad because one thing when you're an older writer writing about younger characters, you have to be
Hmm.
careful sometimes with your pop culture references. Um,
Hmm.
Having Silas's father in there, who was closer to my actual age, that gave
Hmm.
me like the freedom to put some of that in there. And I do
Hmm.
like to do that. Like you said, if you get it, you get it. Um,
Hmm.
and if you don't, because sometimes I read older books from before my time, and
Right.
if I don't get a reference, I'll look it up. And these
Yeah.
days, it's
Yeah.
easier
Yeah.
than ever. You can Google it,
Hmm.
and you'll learn something about ancient pop culture.
Right. Yeah, it's always been there. But I like the humor. And I like, well, actually, yeah, you're talking about pop culture references, man. There's references to Ray Bradbury. There's Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Seinfeld, uh, even Chevy Chase, the Christmas Vacation, because Silas and his dad would watch they'd have a little Christmas marathon. Even that was in there. I like that. But I like
Well,
the opening with Ray Bradbury. I like how natural that kind of like just it kind of lured you in at the beginning. It was very natural the way the characters were talking about Bradbury and just kind of lured Silas into it, and it lures the reader into it also. That's an extra bonus if you know stuff about Bradbury's writing, but it was
yeah.
very, very, very well done.
Well, I'm glad to I wanted him to get sucked into a conversation that wasn't necessarily your typical conversation. I wanted it to be something about books, something that would draw him in, but I wanted
Hmm.
it to be about books that weren't like the you know the book that's on the bestsellers list today, because I thought that would kind of immediately tell you who these kids were, that they would dip into the classics of sci-fi and
Hmm.
fantasy literature, and that would sort of set the stage. Plus, I just love Bradbury, and when I'm writing, I'm just pouring everything I love into it. So
Hmm.
that's and I love to make references to the actual world because I think that
Hmm.
lends it a realism.
True.
I know some people think you shouldn't do that because they say it can date a book. But to me, I don't want to read a book that feels like it's set in a generic world where there's no, like people just drink soda and not
Yeah.
basic. Everybody
Right.
has soda. So I like that about pop culture, like whether it's music or movies or books. I like to
Something
name names.
specific.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like it
Specific.
makes it more real.
So a large majority of this novel is actually set in Furman University, and you attended Furman University. If I'm
I actually did Limestone, but I work at Furman.
Okay, gotcha. Very
Although
interesting.
a little bit of trivia, I did not work at Furman when I started the book. I didn't get my job at Furman until I was probably at the halfway point.
Oh, wow.
But I love Furman. Furman is a beautiful campus in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm not paid to promote them, but it's a beautiful campus that has like a lake that has a walking trail. So a lot of people from the community go there just to walk and everything. And my husband and I go there a lot. We actually got married in Rose Garden there. And it was while we were walking there, my husband and I are exceedingly silly. So we were walking there one day and we were just, talking like we were college students, like, oh, I should have never majored in poli-sci, that sort of thing. And then I made the offhand comment that, if we were younger, you could probably pull that off and nobody would know we weren't students there. And that immediately sort of triggered the idea. So when I sat down to write the novel, I always love to set my books in real places around the area I live. So since that's where the idea came from, it seemed natural to set it at Furman. And then just fate would have it, I ended up working there in the bookstore.
Yeah, retroactive destiny, I
Yeah.
think you might say. But yeah, I like stories and stuff. Like my own work, I'm kind of like that. I like to have I like a firm sense of place in a story, because that's almost like Furman almost became like another character in this in story. You had Silas, you had Gus, you had Chris, you had Franco, and it's almost like and Finn. They have these characters, and it's almost like Furman was its own character. Because you go in such depth of detail, and it becomes like you can picture it in your head, even though I never went there, or I saw some pictures. You showed me some pictures on Instagram about it, and it was like striking how similar it was in my head from your descriptions in the text to like what it actually looked like, because it has such a firm sense of place, which I really appreciated.
Well, I definitely worked hard to make that, because so much of the novel is about Silas's longing, because to him Furman represented a kind of collegiate life that he thought was not attainable to him. And I know that because when I was younger, I grew up in a family where there was no expectation that you would go to college. That wasn't something I grew up thinking would ever happen. And when I graduated high school, I didn't immediately go to college. I worked for 3 years. But I had this deep longing and yearning for that experience. So that was I knew was going to be such a major part of the book. I wanted Furman not to just be, just some backdrop, but to be an exciting and vibrant place that, the reader can understand why he wanted that so much, why he wanted to be a part of this group that went there. So I appreciate that, because I don't know, I get a special thrill out of setting my books in real places that I know and love. And, to somebody across the country, they're not going to know Furman. But, then if I just made up a college, they wouldn't know the difference anyway. So why not set it? I feel like I can give that sense of place even better because I really know that place.
Yes, that makes sense. One of our viewers is actually asking a question right now on screen. It says, is a college setting a personal favorite of yours?
I have written an inordinate number of books that take place on a college campus. And and maybe that's born from when I was younger, that just the idea of college was like almost a romantic idea to me because it was so far removed from
Hmm.
anything that I thought I would ever get to do. And then when I did go to college,
Hmm.
it was a wonderful experience.
Hmm.
I also, even though this is a coming of age novel, I've written a lot of horror novels, and I
Right.
also think the college setting has a unique atmosphere that lends itself to horror, in that it's sort of a world apart, like it's a part of the larger community, but it's also set apart from the community. And for a
Hmm.
lot of kids, it's their first time away from home, kind
Hmm.
of living alone. And I feel like even though they may not all admit it, that can be equally as frightening as it is thrilling.
Hmm.
Um, that always seemed like a good setting for horror, but I also think those years of a person's life are very, even, you know, they always say high school is a formative time, but I think college
Hmm.
really, for me, that was where I figured out who I was and got comfortable in my own skin. And so
Hmm.
I feel like it's such an important time in people's lives that I do tend to dip back there a lot.
Hmm. The major theme of the book, I would say, is forgiveness, and also the idea that there are no really bad people, just bad decisions. I kind of like that. Um, and there's a part in the middle of the book when Silas and Chris are talking, and Chris up to this point has been presented as, I guess you might say, a good person, quote unquote, like generically, but he reveals, a dark part of his past that he wasn't always as, I guess you might say, accepting or forgiving for his own reasons. But I thought that was a very well handled scene, and very it was it was a very emotionally touching scene, actually.
Well,
That was.
and I had that scene in mind
Hmm.
very early on, when I came up with that character of Chris, because I
Hmm.
do think, there's no such thing as a perfect person.
Right,
Um,
exactly.
Even the most conscientious and compassionate person can do things they regret, can do things that hurt other people, whether intentionally or not. And
Hmm.
I think sometimes, forgiveness is important, but a lot of the times forgiving ourselves is important, because if we
True.
don't, when we do something that we shouldn't have, that maybe hurt someone else, if we kind of wallow in that and can't get past it,
Hmm.
there's no way to move forward from that. So
True.
I do believe that, we are the choices we make. So if you make bad choices today, make better choices tomorrow. Um, and that can't always repair all the wounds. Like, if you've hurt someone, they may never be willing to forgive you. You may never be able to repair that relationship. But,
Hmm.
you still need to do better just for
Hmm.
yourself. Um, and so that you don't get yourself in a situation like that in the future. So that was a very important theme for me in the book, because
Hmm.
I do believe we don't put enough weight on the fact that every day is a chance to be a better person. And if you fall short
True.
one day, the next day is just waiting right around the corner.
That is true. Um, so let's hop in that DeLorean and go back in time. What kind of kid were you growing up, and what led you to want to be a writer?
Um, I was a very shy and awkward kid. Um,
Hmm. Me too.
so there was a lot going on. There was some home life stuff,
Hmm.
and because I did grow up very poor, that kind
Hmm.
of singled me out at school. Um,
Hmm.
but I was also the sissy kid. Um,
Hmm.
you know, I mean, from a very early age, I think somebody could have flagged me as as a future homosexual of America. But
Hmm.
so that definitely, so I was very introverted. I was very to myself, um, and I got really into movies first, and then I discovered reading. So, I became the bookish kid. And I guess really from the point I realized that stories were just something that people just made up out of their heads and wrote down, I wanted to do that because, books have a profound effect on me. I wanted to do that. Plus, I lived in my head a lot. I was just
Right.
always making up games because, I didn't really have friends growing up. It was just me and my imagination, and I was just always weaving these stories in my head in my play. So it just seemed almost natural when I just started using my imagination to weave stories onto the page. So, you know, that really did lead me to become a writer. The stuff I was writing when I was very young, not not particularly good, but it was all part of the journey, and I've just never, it's always been my passion. It's always been the thing I most wanted to do when I was most excited to do, and so I don't look back at my younger years with bitterness or rancor because it really did help me become the person I am today.
That is true. Everyone's like that. Take one piece out, and you're not going to be the same person. You got a question on the screen from a viewer. While writing the book, did you interview any students regarding campus life at Furman?
Well, first I'll say, Craig Metcalf, that is my beautiful husband. Hello to him. But I actually, I had that idea. Like I said, I got it when we were just walking and being silly. And then it just stayed in the back of my head for a while. But then a few years ago, I got the opportunity to give a TED Talk at Furman University. And they had a lot of students who were working the TED Talk. And they were dynamic and intelligent and passionate about things and political. And, it got me thinking about that idea because, we sometimes are quick to dismiss the younger generation and, but there are young people who I look at and I think they're going to really make a difference in the world. So that inspired me to really, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write this book. But I haven't been in college for, a million years. So I did talk to them because I wanted to know, like, what is it like for a college student today? And they were very kind enough to talk to me, and they told me a lot of stuff about what they do, what they're interested in, where they hang out, and I think that really helped inform the book. So I'm very grateful to the TEDx staff from Furman that let me bother them with questions quite a bit.
Yeah, I something you just said struck me. How you're talking about you like withdrew into movies and books as a kid. I think a lot of creators out there, whether they be in film or writers or comics or whatever, I don't quite know if they understand how important they can be to people, like younger people and just anybody in general. Like their work can be so important to somebody. Like a band or a movie or a book can literally save someone's life or change someone's life. And
I always say that books did save. I mean, I grew up poor in a very small southern town. I didn't know much about the world outside of that town until I discovered books. Books taught me about the wider world, that there were different kinds of people in the world, that there might be places where I wouldn't seem so strange. And that really was important to me because that's where I discovered that. And so, and I would read things sometimes and I would read a passage that I could relate to so much. I'd be like, there's somebody out there who understands me, who gets it.
I've been there. I've been there before.
It was, books really did, kind of save me from feeling like I had to just follow in line with, what I saw presented to me. It helped me open doors for me.
Who were some of the specific writers that really affected you? I know some
Well,
of them, but who?
yeah. I mean, as a big horror geek,
Mm-hmm.
it's not a normal, answer, but Stephen King
Mm-hmm.
really grabbed my imagination. And what I liked that he did so well was that he created people and places that I could understand. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
like taking place in a Gothic castle or,
Right.
Foggy Moor. Like it was just a small town with small town people that I felt like I knew.
Mm-hmm.
And that really, I mean, that's what sucks me into a Stephen King novel. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
idea concepts are great, but he creates people and places that just feel so real. I just slide into them.
Mm-hmm.
So he definitely was a big influence. One of my biggest influences as a writer is actually the original television show, The Twilight Zone. So I'm going to say
Yes,
Rod Serling, but also
that is
Charles
probably
Book.
my favorite. That is my favorite TV show of all time, undoubtedly. The
I
original
mean,
black and white series.
I was watching The Twilight Zone all the time, and that really kind of informed a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the horror I write, which is more what I call subtle or ambiguous horror.
Mm-hmm.
So that show really had a big influence on me. Um, when I discovered Anne Rice,
Mm-hmm.
I loved her for her eccentricity,
Mm-hmm.
her willingness to be as over the top and as strange as she wants to be. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I Clive Barker was a huge influence on me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, not just his fiction, which I thought was bold and original in a way that I hadn't quite seen before,
Mm-hmm.
but as a game man, when he
Mm-hmm.
publicly came out, that was very
Mm-hmm.
that kind of changed the game for me because I didn't see a lot of out gay men working in the
Mm-hmm.
genre that I loved. So that was a big influence on me. Neil Gaiman, um,
Mm-hmm.
I discovered him with The Sandman, and then went on to
Mm-hmm.
his novels, story collections. I like he just creates magic to me. And then I dipped back and I found Bradbury and Matheson, and I mean I could go on and on. Almost every writer I've ever read, just
Mm-hmm.
I get so excited that they're even if I don't like a book, I'm so excited that it exists,
Mm-hmm.
that somebody sat down and poured out their passion onto the page. So
Mm-hmm.
I get very fanboy over a lot of stuff.
Yeah, you mentioned Clive Barker. I actually got a Hellraiser shirt on right now. I love that. But yeah, Books of Blood had a huge, profound impact on me when I read that when I was like 17. I was just like, I've read a lot of horror up to that point, but nothing quite like that. Like it was
Yeah.
just the rawness of it, and I was like, blew me away. First time I read Midnight Meat Train, I was hooked, man. Pun intended. If you've read that story, if everyone's read that story, pun intended.
The books of
But yeah.
really just it was the kind of stories where I'm just like, I don't even know where you come up with that idea. But then he
Mm-hmm.
really and then, I turned around and I read something like The Thief of Always, which is a
Mm-hmm.
charming like YA fantasy
Mm-hmm.
story. And I'm like, he can just and he paints and I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a huge Barker fan.
Yeah, me too. And you mentioned Neil Gaiman, also one of my favorites. You're a comic fan, obviously. I mentioned Sandman there. I
I
mean,
mean, I I used to because when I was in college, that's when
mm-hmm.
Sandman was still a regular
Mm-hmm.
monthly, and
Right.
me and my friend, a friend of mine, we were just kind of obsessed with it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm still kind of obsessed with it. I mean, the show was
The show is amazing.
but yeah, I got into that, and I started dipping into other like Vertigo comics back then, Hellblazer,
Mm-hmm.
Preacher came out.
Yes.
Um,
Oh, Preacher. That may be my
yeah,
favorite comedy of all time. I love
but
that.
and Neil Gaiman started writing a lot of novels and short stories and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading Neverwhere, and it was one of those books where when it ended, I wanted to follow them and see what they
Mm-hmm.
were next because I wasn't ready to let go of those characters. So yeah, Neil Gaiman is a huge is huge with me.
Yeah, Neverwhere. Neverwhere is still. I've read all of Neil Gaiman's books. Neverwhere is still my favorite. I just
Yeah,
love
mine.
the whole thing of the every character is like identifiable with a street or a portion of London, and just the world below. And I just love the whole thing. It's an amazing feat. And let's see. You also you mentioned you write a lot of horror. You have another book coming out towards the end of the month called Lucid. I haven't read that one yet, but I'm going to. That's on my. It's like the book after next on my reading queue. If you like, you can talk about some of that. What's that
Okay,
about?
yeah. Lucid comes out on the 30th of this month, and
Hmm.
it's a book all about dreams. It takes place almost entirely in dreams. Um,
Hmm.
Oddly, I got the idea because I was just thinking about that rule that you sometimes hear in writing classes that say never start a story with a dream.
Hmm.
And I was thinking like, well, what if the entire story took place in a dream? Then maybe you start the story with something in the waking world and then you just go off. So I had this idea for a man who's a lucid dreamer,
Hmm.
um, control his dreams, and he's got a rough life, so he creates almost this perfect ideal world in his dreams that he can escape to. And he ends up getting in an accident that puts him in a coma, and um, then once he is in the coma, he's kind of trapped in the dream, which doesn't seem
Hmm.
so bad at first. It's his ideal world, but then the dream starts to turn against him
Hmm.
in a way he could not predict, and um, so it was very. I wanted the book to feel surreal because dreams are surreal.
Hmm.
So it's the most unstructured thing I've ever written. Like I would sit down to write for the day with absolutely no idea like what was going to happen in the scene that I was about to
Hmm.
write. And
Hmm.
I'm not an outliner by nature, but I still usually have some structure set in my head at least.
Hmm.
But this one, I would just sit down and decide, well, this is going to happen,
Hmm.
and it it actually did end up weaving all together. But I mean, I did want it to keep the reader off kilter because, like I said, I wanted it to read sort of like the surreal nature of a dream.
They always say, yeah, they always have the writer's rules. Don't start in a dream. And then if you start and think about that kind of things like rules, what rules? Like, are there really
Yeah.
rules to writing? I mean, you look back at literature, what rules? There's people just breaking rules all the time. They just do whatever you want.
Well, I often say that if you give me a rule, I can give you a ton of examples of successful books that break those rules. I mean,
Hmm.
take that with a grain of salt. Anytime I see an article with that says like 5 things writers should stop doing, like all that says to me, that's something the person who wrote that article doesn't like, and that's fine.
Hmm.
You like, but that doesn't mean that somebody else might not like that thing you don't. So I always tell writers, write what feels right to you,
Hmm.
and it'll find its audience because everything you write, there are going to be some people who don't like it, and they are
Hmm.
typically much more vocal than the
Right,
people
yeah, true. True, true.
um, so you got to have a
We
thick
agree
skin.
to disagree.
That doesn't work for that person. It doesn't have to work for everybody. Not
Hmm.
everybody is going to be something's target audience. And I
Hmm.
see that
True.
sometimes in criticism where I feel like people are upset that they're not that book's target audience. And I'm like,
Hmm.
well, you don't have to be. So, but
Right.
yeah, I'm just babbling at this point, but yeah.
No, you're not babbling at all. Actually, let's take a trip to Fantasyland here. Let's say Hollywood options the advantage for a movie. Who would you like to see in the writer's chair? Who would you like to see write it, and who would you like to see in the director's chair?
Um, I it almost seems so out of the realm of possibility that I don't think about that a lot. But
Hmm.
I'm trying to think of some of the I guess, and I don't necessarily think of this novel as YA. It is coming of age. It is
Hmm.
about young people, but I do know
Hmm.
there are some people if a book is about young people, they consider it YA. Um,
Right.
uh, a writer I like that does a lot of YA is John Green.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if you're that familiar with his work, but he did The Fault in Our Stars, which was his big book.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
he also did Looking for Alaska, which I think is a wonderful book, and they made it into a wonderful Hulu miniseries a few years ago.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and you know, not that John Green would ever want to write a screenplay of one of my books, but I do think I feel like this book touches on some themes that he likes to touch on, so I could
Hmm.
see that. As a director, um, you know, I'm oddly not that familiar with a lot of directors anymore. All the
Hmm.
directors I know are still the directors from when I was growing up.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm just not sure how to answer that one. Definitely not me. I don't I don't think I have the mindset for film, and I love it. I'm a fan of it.
Hmm.
I admire
Hmm.
writers who really write for television and movies and direct television and movies, but um, that is it's not something that particularly interests me.
Hmm.
So I feel like I'd want to give it to somebody who respected the material, but then let them do their own thing.
All right. So here's an even more difficult question on that. If someone were
Hmm.
to make a biopic on your life, who would star as you?
Well, let's see. Who is goofy enough to be me?
Hmm.
Um, I will say that somebody told me at Furman one day that I look like John Green, but he's not an
Hmm.
actor, so
Hmm.
I don't think that he would want to go into that. But who could be me? I mean, if we could get him off of the Halloween thing he was on, we could go with Anthony Michael Hall because
Hmm. Oh, I can see that.
we were and we were both geeks in high school. Let's face it. Um, so so I'll go with that. Just he cannot say evil never dies.
Hmm. I'll always picture him as the geek in 16 Candles. No matter how old he gets, I'll always picture him as 16 Candles with Molly Ringwald. It's like when he's trapped in that the glass table after the party, and
Yeah,
he's like banging on the window, let me out, let me out.
and I,
That's
you
good
know,
silly stuff.
I guess the first movie I saw him in was The Breakfast Club,
Hmm.
and I could relate to him, but I also wanted to give him some pointers on how to properly be the geek because I would watch it and I would just be saying to the screen like, stop talking. You're drawing too much attention to yourself. Stop talking.
All right, lightning round. Okay, here's
Okay.
these like the free association questions. Ask them, like, just say whatever comes to your mind. All time favorite movie.
Steel Magnolias.
Hmm,
That's very cute,
interesting.
but
Hmm. Okay. All time favorite horror movie.
Halloween.
Halloween. What do you think of Rob Zombie's Halloween remake?
We will not discuss. I like he has a target audience, and I respect that.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
love the suspense and gradual build of tension of the original.
Hmm.
Um, the characterization and the payoff that comes only after you've gotten to know them. Like to me, that is the kind of horror that I love and I strive to do.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I can enjoy, you know, more extreme horror. I
Hmm.
don't have a problem with that, but Halloween to me is kind of the pinnacle of what I think horror can do.
Hmm. What do you think? What's your opinion of remakes in general?
I mean, I don't mind remakes as much as other people,
Hmm.
because I know it seems like there's a proliferation, but so many of the movies I watched growing up in the 80s were actually remakes. The Fly, The Thing, Invasion of Body Snatchers. All movies that, we hold up as classics, as we should, because they're great. But, they were actually remakes too.
True.
So I think you can do remakes that are. I think the trick is to do a remake that is in keeping with the spirit of the original, but not a carbon copy of the original. Because if you make a remake too close to the original, my thought is, why don't you just watch the original? All you're doing is making the same movie, but with modern actors and a more modern look. But if you can take a concept, like I liked the Dawn of the Dead remake.
I love that. That one's done right.
Yeah, but they did something new with it and fresh. There can be originality even in a remake. If they go too far afield, then it's like you're just trying to get the name recognition without getting too. But I have no problem with the concept of remakes. I want to see them both in keeping of the spirit, but still doing something new with it.
Have you seen the new Hellraiser yet?
I have not. I do want to see it. We don't have Hulu, so we're going to have to get that to see it. But I am interested in seeing it. I haven't kept up with the Hellraiser series much since. I don't even know how many they ended up having before the remake.
Oh, let's see. I think they had. I think it was 11 all told.
Because the last one I saw. The last one I saw was the one where they brought Kirsty back from the original. But then she
that was 6. That was Hellseeker, I think. Yeah.
And they didn't really do anything with her, and then I felt gypped because I'm like, oh, you.
Yeah. I feel like the whole movie, and then she's like in like 5 minutes of that movie.
I felt like this was clearly a script that existed already, and they shoehorned her in for the spectacle of we're bringing back, as they say now, a legacy character. But I'm like, but yeah, you didn't. She wasn't really there, so I didn't really watch many after that. But this, I am interested in seeing this new interpretation of it.
All right, let's see. Favorite guilty pleasure movie? That movie that's not really that good, but you love it anyway?
Well, okay, I will say one. I never feel guilty when I enjoy something. But I do know there are movies that I know in my head, like, because when I grew up, I just loved every movie. Like, I didn't even know there were bad movies. So, like, there is a movie from the 80s called Satisfaction. It starred Justine Bateman from Family Ties fame.
Oh, right.
And then Julia Roberts before she was famous. And I know that movie really technically isn't good, but I still think it's a lot of fun. I enjoy it. One of the characters is the singing voice of Jim, which was my favorite cartoon when I was growing up. Again, Steel Magnolia is my favorite movie. I watched Jim growing up. Obviously, I was destined to be gay. But I might have to pick that one because, again, I know it's not good, but it's entertaining to me. And some people may think I should feel guilty about this, but the cheerleading movie they made, Bring It On.
Oh, yeah.
11 times in the theater. And maybe I should feel guilty about that. But I was living with my friend Susan back then. We just kept going to see it. We couldn't stop going to see it. It was just pure fun for us. And so, some people, I don't feel guilty, but some people may think I should.
They've actually I don't know if it's out yet or if it's going to come out. They have a Bring It On slasher sequel. It's like set in the same universe, but they've decided to turn it into a slasher movie. So it's like I forget what it's called. It's like Bring It On. I want to say like Final Cut or something, but I can't remember what the title is. But it's like number 6 in the series, and they said, "Hey, we're going to make it into a slasher movie now."
I have not heard about it. I have not seen any other Bring It On,
Mm-hmm.
but the original one with Kirsten Dunst and Eliza Dushku can't get
Right.
enough of.
All right. Favorite all-time. Okay, there we go. Bring It On, Cheer or Die. That's what it's called. Thank you. Okay, so okay. Favorite TV show all time.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah, I love that show. That's my number 2 after the original Twilight Zone. I love that. I love the Buffyverse. I'm a huge Buffy nerd. I love that show.
I will, we'll have to have some Buffy offs one day because I know that, I mean, I got my husband to watch it. He really likes it too. But I take it to a level, like if we see a random episode, he may be like, so were they in college yet? Or I'm like, how do you episode 3 of season 4, Willow is not a lesbian yet, and I know, so I'm kind of that show, but yeah, so that's why you should have been surprised if you knew me to see Buffy pop up in The Advantage.
Okay, let's see. 5 favorite musical performers.
I really love Melissa Etheridge. I don't know a lot of people know her anymore, but she was really big when I was in college. I love Adele. Adele is just can do no wrong with me. Beautiful, beautiful. I love Kelly Clarkson. Again, I just think she has a wonderful voice. I'm not a big country fan, but I love the Chicks. I just think they make interesting music that tells stories that I like. And even though it's only in the last few years I've really gotten into them, I'm really don't make fun. I'm really into Taylor Swift because, and I feel like I don't really listen to her older stuff, but her newer stuff I feel like is interesting and mature and well written, and again tells stories. Like her new album, she has songs that interconnect. So like it's one story from different. I don't know, but I know that sounds weird for a horror fan because when I was in college, my music taste was very different. In college, I was all about The Cure and Pearl Jam and Nine Inch Nails and Hole. I was obsessed with Hole. But and I still can enjoy that music, but it's just not my go-to anymore.
All right. What was your first Halloween costume as a kid that you can remember?
The first one I remember was the devil. That really suffocating mask with the band on it. And then it came with a cape, I think. But I remember going as the devil one year.
Okay. You meet your 13-year-old self. What advice do you give the teenage you?
That you're gonna get a good life. It just may not come in the way that you think it is going to.
That's pretty good.
Don't expect everything to happen according to you. Like life can be good without it going according to the plan you have when you're 13.
Sure. Okay, you find that genie's lamp. What 3 things do you wish for?
Well, I mean, I know this is going to sound weird, but I feel like I have so much of what I wanted. I have a spouse that I love and who loves me. We have a wonderful home. I have a job that I enjoy. I'm publishing. I think I would focus my wishes outward. Because there's a lot I see in the world. I want, for instance, as much progress as we've made. There's so many queer kids, particularly in this area where I live, who still struggle with their families, who get kicked out. So I would wish for them to be able to find acceptance and family love. I would wish for everyone who has a dream to be able to pursue it. Because I feel like there are a lot of people who have dreams when they're younger and then let them die because life gets in the way. And I know that. I know when I graduated from college and I got my first real job and I got my first place on my own, I actually stopped writing for a few years because it was so stressful. So I feel like some people never make their way out of that. Luckily, I did, and I got back to it. So wish that. And I guess thirdly, I guess I would just wish that people could learn to not get so upset by things that don't affect them.
True.
As a member of the LGBT community, like, I feel like so many of our problems come from the fact that people are getting so upset about our lives when they don't affect them.
That is true.
I don't know why you care. Mary too, but I wish that I feel like there is when people get that upset about stuff that doesn't affect them, I feel like there's some dissatisfaction in themselves and their life. So I wish them to not get so upset about things that don't have anything to do with them.
All right. Well, thank you, Mark. It has been an absolutely fantastic show talking to you. And
Thank you.
I want to thank you for being a guest on our show tonight. And are there any shout-outs? Any shout-outs you want to give?
To my beautiful husband out there. I saw some names I recognized in the chat. Jeremy, Raul. So thank you for tuning in. And like I said, to all the writers out there, I love you. I appreciate you exist. Keep telling your stories.
Right. So remember, everyone, pick up your copy of The Advantage on Amazon. It's available right now. And there it is. Yep. And after I review your book, Lucid, got to have you back on the show again so we can talk about that and talk more horror and talk more Buffy the Vampire Slayer and more Twilight Zone. This has been really fun.
Sure thing.
So, okay, everyone, thank you again for coming, Mark. And everyone, if you like this show, like, share, subscribe, Critical Blast, and that's all I can really say tonight. It's been a blast. So, have a night. Bye.
Bye-bye.